Welcome back to Soulful and Sober. Today I'm talking about the feelings of being super overwhelmed or having constant worry. First off, I really want to bring this topic up because I get like this sometimes, and I've really had to learn to understand my body more. You will hear me talk about this nonstop, but when we stop drinking, when we start listening to our bodies, things make more sense because our bodies are always speaking to us. So I got sick like twice in a span of a few months, and I'm like, okay, I'm not dealing with things good enough. I don't even want to say good enough. I need to deal with things differently. And I want to explain what happens to our bodies when we feel these emotions like overwhelm, worry, and what's going on underneath. So for some of us, when we were drinking, these things always were happening, but sometimes we weren't just as aware of them. So when we stop drinking, we become a lot more aware of things because we don't have something to run to like alcohol. And I do want to point out some people will go to other things like eating or scrolling, and you might be sober for who knows how long, and these things still could happen to you. And I just want to point out, I don't think there's like one perfect scenario. Like if you stop drinking or you stop doing this, I think the first thing is having awareness that this is what's going to happen to your body. And might be what's happening to you. So I want to talk a little bit about our bodies and what happens when we don't feel safe in our bodies. So when you have constant overwhelm and you're always worried, your brain thinks you're unsafe. Your brain's kind of this, and your gut are these messengers, and it can perceive this feeling of, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. Oh my God, ah, as you're not safe. So when your body thinks you're not safe, it will go into what my mentor calls protection mode. So the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Oftentimes you'll see people that aren't motivated, right? They feel lazy, yet they're not. They're literally freezing, or you numb, right? We sometimes will go to food or alcohol, scrolling, shopping, and we numb out versus, obviously know what's going on. And so what happens too is when you go into like fight flight, you have a lot of hormones that are, in play, right? So one of them being cortisol, and cortisol will shoot out a lot of sugar, right? Because it wants you to get ready for this huge fight or this huge thing to protect you. And keep in mind, it's not really happening, right? We're not fighting a saber-toothed tiger. We're trying to get chores done and work on different projects. And so what'll happen too when you have high cortisol levels, you'll have digestion issues. You'll have some, maybe even some bloating. Sometimes people don't even like feel like working out. They feel so blah. And you might have like lack of sleep. Also, your sugar cravings might increase. So you're obviously wanting some comfort food or sugar or something to help you with all these cravings and all these things that are happening. And I also want to point out that, um, sometimes you might shut down. Um, you might not be able to think clearly. You might feel blah. And so sometimes people are like, I feel blah. And again, you don't have to be drinking for this to happen. You might be sober at this point, but you might notice this and you might, in a weird way, like self sabotage yourself, even though it doesn't make sense. But your body's job is to protect you. So if it sees a threat, like constant worry or overwhelm, it's going to try to protect you. And I really want to talk about some things you can do, but I also want to talk about potentially what's really going on. And keep in mind, high levels of cortisol are not good. Cortisol in itself isn't bad, right? But like if you have chronic things happening to your body that creates inflammation, inflammation creates stress. You see, this is kind of this crazy vicious cycle. So I think our job is to have awareness is, are you burned out, right? Like, we have a lot of hats we wear, and sometimes it's not always about the thing that we have to do. We might be busy, but it might be perfectionism, fear of disappointing people, fear of failure, past trauma or stress, overthinking, and then pressure to have it all together. And so I think oftentimes that's what's going underneath this overwhelm. So I think understanding why we feel the way we feel and then constant worry. So worry thoughts can be habitual, right? They serve a purpose. If I keep worrying about this thing, I'll be able to protect myself and control it for when it happens. The problem is there's so much out of our control that it's very taxing to do that. Why? Because I've done it before. And then if you are drinking, alcohol makes this way worse, right? Because it increases your cortisol levels. So not only are you feeling overwhelmed and stressed and you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't handle things, you're putting basically, fire to your system. Cortisol disrupts like high levels of cortisol disrupts your sleep. And I want to say something too. Cortisol, again, it peaks through different times of the day. Um, there's lots of ways we can, you know, peak our cortisol levels. And so there's other ways. Um, and then obviously alcohol dysregulates your nervous system. Um, you know, so when we go into these different states, and if we do shut down or numb, we want a dopamine fix, right? So like sometimes we will maybe eat more food, eat sugary foods, eat in abundance, right? We're eating maybe emotionally eating, to feel like to not feel what we don't want to feel. And also we drink, right? Sometimes we'll drink to try to numb out these emotions and this regulation that we're having. Sometimes again you'll like notice yourself scrolling endlessly, and your massive to-do list is still there, but you're like, can't do it. And then that also builds a cycle. So if you drink, if you eat, if you scroll, if you don't set out to do the things that you want to do, what happens is you create this cycle where you're like, I hate myself, right? I'm so mad at myself. Why can't I be better? Why can't I be like that person? And that in itself also puts you in an unsafe mindset, right? So then you go back into protection mode. So you go into the sympathetic, so where you're feeling the same thing over and over again. So basically, you don't ever feel safe in your body and you have this constant state of stress. And so I think the first rule of thumb with anything is to notice that this is happening, that you are having this experience happen. And you might feel angry, right? Because you're in the fight flight, and then you might shut down. We can go in between some of those states. Usually people go from sympathetic, so fight flight, to more the dorsal, so where they're more freeze and numb. And as you always will hear me say, you can't change anything unless you have awareness. So if you're noticing, you're not able to relax, right? I had a point when I was trying to meditate and I just kept thinking about all the crap I had to do. And I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous because this is not how I want to live, right? Like when we start sacrificing the things that we love and enjoy that really do bring us back to the parasympathetic. So it brings you back more to that protection mode where you feel safe, where you feel like flowy, where you feel just a little bit better, right? Where your digestion's at rest, where, your creation, like your creative thoughts come to play. That's where you want to be. And if you're not there, again, I'm not saying that we have to have like no worry or no overwhelm ever. And obviously, some level of stress sometimes is helpful, right? Like when we have to get something done really quick and we have that spike and we're like, okay, we got it done because we had to hurry up and do it. So I don't want to demonize stress and, and or cortisol or any of that stuff. But I think my point being is high levels of it will be very, very damaging to your body. And we just have a lot of things that happen to us when we are not in a safe position, right? Your body's like looking out for threats. Again, you might be numbing, freezing, not motivated. And so, and again, what we don't know, we can't change. And then usually you need to just connect with yourself. Like, what actually do you need? And some tools that I want to share is, I guess before I share that too, is I want to also just really recognize the if I just try harder, if I just work more, if I just do this thing more. And the problem is that sometimes not doing things feels unsafe to your body, right? So resting feels unsafe. It doesn't feel like you can just chill out. You are you are in safety mode, right? You're in the sympathetic. I'm sorry, you are in protection mode. You're not feeling safe. You're feeling stressed. You can't rest. And so those are things that signal to your body that you're not safe, right? Like danger, danger, danger. And that's why it's really important to work on this. Your nervous system needs safety, right? And some of the things you can do, because when you get in these states where, ooh, you fight flight, you will notice your breathing changes, your heart rate changes. So those are some things that will happen. And what I would suggest you doing is kind of taking inventory of what's going on. So I think, again, underneath just the overwhelm, or maybe you're putting so much pressure on yourself to do all the things. And, as some of us are entrepreneurs, some of us have jobs, some of us are busy parents. There's a lot of stressors. So, what's in our control and what's not in our control? Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Prioritizing your needs is optimal and number one. If you don't prioritize your needs, you will burn out. You will burn both ends. Most of us have been there, and there's been times where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have to figure this out. Like, this isn't healthy." And when you stop drinking, I hate to tell people this, is that you still might have these things happen, because oftentimes when people remove alcohol, they can't numb out, right? Like, or they might go to something else, or they might go back to drinking. And it's just understanding your patterns. Or you go to food, or you go to something else versus dealing with what's going on internally. And again, those are the important things. Dealing what's going on internally, getting kind of in touch with yourself, whether you need help with that or whether you journal, whether you meditate, figuring out what feeds your soul and what you want to do. And I think looking for solutions as well, and also not putting so much pressure on yourself. The other thing too is, we want to make sure that we are finding really good ways to calm our nervous system. So, humming, taking walks, taking, deep breaths like breath work. And you can find tons of them on YouTube. If you have my book, there's free resources with breath work. I did a yoga class with breath work tonight, and which is like, if you can't might not be able to see me, but I'm in like, active wear. It it was so calming to my nervous system, and also how we think too. So I think our thoughts can put us into this dysregulated, space too. So it's sometimes once you're calmer, you can kind of look at your thoughts, right? So if you are dysregulated and freaking out, it is really hard to make decisions and access much of anything because you are so dysregulated. You might make decisions you wouldn't make if you were calm. They might be irrational, you know? And so I think it's really taking some deep breaths, relaxing, telling yourself you're safe, you're going to be okay. Like the world is not going to fall down if you don't get everything done. But also looking at things from more of a logical standpoint, like, okay, why am I so overwhelmed? Okay, well, I feel so much pressure to be perfect, and I have to do this. And what if people care about me? And telling yourself it's okay not to do everything all at once. So I would, definitely move your body, do breath work, meditation, you know, signals in your body that you're okay, like hugging yourself. I know it sounds crazy, but that's, just really, touching your hands, putting it in water and cold water, maybe in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method where you're like looking in your environment for things, just calming your nervous system. Sometimes it's going for a walk and noticing the trees and getting out of your mind and into your body. Also, where are you constricted? Some people hold a lot of tensions in their shoulders. So when you are in the, sympathetic place where you're freezing and you're stressing out, you might hold stress in your hips, your back, your shoulders. I hold it in my shoulders. And if I have chronic stress and I work out, I will get tension headaches. And it's not fun. But noticing where your body is constricting and then also what feels good in your body. Once you're calm, there's signals your body tells you that feel good, right? And so these are just some things, I know this is just going to try to be a quick podcast, but these are some things I would recommend. Just trying to see if there's anything else I would think about. When we stop drinking, we learn so much about ourselves, and this is just part of the process. So give yourself a lot of love and space. And the other thing too is work through what's going on underneath. I think that's a really, really important thing. And just because somebody gets, high levels of overwhelm doesn't mean we can't get out of it, right? It's recognizing the thoughts we're having, the patterns we're having. Is this serving us or is this really just exhausting us? And we are just so stressed out. Maybe you need to take a break from whatever you're doing. The other thing too, and I won't go too much into depth with this because actually this is like something I'm learning about and maybe I could do a podcast episode on it, but like also like 55 to-do lists, like I don't know, that might put you into a protection mode too where you're freaking out. So it's do a brain dump of all the things you have to do if you're so stressed out and you have so much to do. Dump it all on a piece of paper or a computer, whatever works for you. And then what do you have to do in the next 48 hours? What are the top things you have to do and schedule them into your calendar? Because what happens is if we have like 1,000 tabs open in our brain and we have a million things to do, it's, there's only so much our brains and our bodies and and we can take, right? So like if you're literally have a lot to do, get it out on paper, get it scheduled and planned, and then go back to your schedule and see what else maybe need to do for the rest of the week. But having like 45 to-do lists, like what's the priority, right? Like what's one do you have to do the first? Like what's the second? Because if you look at a list of like 50 things, like I don't know about you, but I might have a nervous breakdown. So just little things that make you feel good. Sometimes it's also cleaning your spaces. And for me, definitely it's organizing and getting things put in order because sometimes it's not for me. So that makes me feel better and so it's just like little things that could help you out. And um I hope this has been helpful, but and really the things that happen when we go into again, I'm using what my mentor says, protection mode, which is the sympathetic, which is flight, fight, freeze, fawn. Um Lots of other hormones are at play when things happen. It's really interesting. And even with cravings like for sugar and certain things, it's so interesting that we can go into this protection mode so you don't feel safe with the thoughts you're having, diets. And also, too, I want to say, like, even thoughts around alcohol. I can't ever drink again. How am I like, you put yourself literally in this fight flight. And when you're in that state, you're dysregulated. You might have a trigger, and then you are going to maybe drink again. And then you're kind of in this vicious cycle. And this can happen with, diet culture and eating and emotional eating. So I just think this stuff is really interesting and I'm excited to talk more about it. I'm learning more about it. But I think that it helps people understand like they're not terrible failures, right? Like there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to our bodies and our minds and the nervous system and the communication signals. And so I think for you today is kind of how are you sleeping? How are you going to the bathroom? Are you constipated? What's going on? Because your gut tells you a lot too, right? Are you um not taking time for yourself? And yes, bubble baths are great, but also it's checking in with yourself. Like, okay, self, how am I doing? How am I thinking about things? Am I like worried all the time? So I think that would be helpful to do. And by the way, bubble baths are great. I love baths. I do. But again, self-care can look different for everybody. Um, for me, I think because I work full time and because I do a lot on my plate, sometimes it's remembering to do less. And even though that's very, very hard for me, it's very important to do less sometimes because sometimes we think we have to keep doing more. And I know I said that earlier, but I just want to reiterate. And I think women, we tend to put a lot on our plates as well. And we think we can handle it all. And then when we can't, we're like, what's wrong with us? That person on social media did it and they did it so good. And we tend to, look outward versus looking inward. And the journey of removing alcohol, the journey of self-love, all of it comes from inward, looking inside of us and not thinking we're lacking something. We can always learn something, but I think really it's giving yourself a lot of love. This journey isn't always easy, but I also think people really don't give themselves enough credit for how far they've come. So that is all I have today. I'm trying to make this a brief episode. So if you have any questions, let me know. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.